what are those questions that you typically tick through your head on, Kathy, and say, before I walk into this meeting, before I make this presentation, before I have this conversation, this one-on-one conversation, I need to know these things? Do you have sort of a checklist of questions you use?
Yeah, I actually do. And I will say that I've adapted my questions from Nancy Duarte, who is a highly regarded communication expert. So some of you might already know some of these questions, but it's always good to kind of revisit and come back to the basics. And what you'll probably note from these questions is one of the last questions is, what do I want them to do? So as we were talking about from the beginning, I think we all sometimes can get caught up in the hustle and the bustle and the rush of what do we need to get out of this meeting, or what do we need to convey in the message. But we really should be backing that up and thinking about who our audience is and what do they need out of the meeting. So the first question is, who is your audience, right? And that's the very basic piece of it in terms of who's going to be in the room, who are the decision makers. If it's a one-on-one meeting, or just a smaller meeting, what are the interests, psychographics, demographics that of these people that might help you connect and understand what maybe they might value? And so the reason I think doing that doing that homework and finding that information is important does also relate to you. So who are you and how can you relate to this audience in these ways? And I actually have kind of a funny story about this. And oftentimes I will work with people who just don't feel connected with a client that they have. Like I don't feel very connected with their industry or whatever it might be. And I say that's on you. Like you have to work to do the work to figure out how can you find that connection so that you can be more authentic and so that you can feel more comfortable in that situation. And when I was working in the real estate division in terms of advertising, there was a time period where I was working very closely with real estate auctioneers. I knew nothing about real estate auctions. I grew up in the Northern Virginia, DC area, had never been to an auction a day in my life, and had my own bias and preconceived notion about auctions. And so I had to do a lot of research and digging to kind of figure out where is this space that I'm going to connect with these auctioneers. And what I really learned in my research and my background knowledge was that a lot of these auctioneer companies were family-run businesses, had generations and generations of people who worked together in these auction companies. And I am a Cuban American woman, and my family very much values family and connection in that relationship. And so I found this connection with them immediately, which was family and the way that they approached things. And so I feel like we could develop relationships and having a little bit more of interest in how did they get into this? Tell me, what does this mean for you and your family? And it made me develop that trust and credibility with them in a different way. So that's why kind of looking at who your audience and who you are makes a difference.
I'm not sure I've ever thought about the who am I as a part of, I think of audience. I'm looking at the other, I'm looking at the receiver end of this. Even though I know that, the sender receiver is a transactional, it's both happening all the time, but that's such a great question and such a good example of how that does end up playing into finding the common ground and finding those connection points. I love that. So we ask, who is in the audience, demographics, psychographics, interest, who am I, and where are my connection points? What else do we ask?
Mm-hmm. So this kind of goes to the friendly, neutral, hostile, and why are they here? So are they willing participants or is this mandatory? What are their expectations? So asking that question and kind of revisiting why they're in the room or why they're in that meeting. Are they taking that meeting with you after you've hounded their administrative assistant many times to get in the door? They're going to be coming at it in a different way. You need to prepare for that in a different way than somebody who maybe called you and asked you to come meet with them. Yeah. So that why they are here. And then that goes into how much do they already know about their topic? How much do they need to know to make a decision? We don't want to overcomplicate things. People have limited time and attention spans. So really thinking about why they're here and what they already know ahead of time is also two good questions. The next kind of section I go into is what I said earlier in terms of what is their pain point or what is their problem. everyone likes to hear how you can make their lives better. And so that feeds into, how can you solve their problem? Is there anything that you have at your fingertips that can help solve their problem? And hopefully you're having that communication or that meeting because you want there to be a mutual benefit, right?
Right, right.
That's clear.
I love Nancy Duarte's language on that. What keeps them up at night?
Right.
You know, when I can figure out what's causing you to lose sleep, and then if I have something that can help resolve that, now we've got a connection point here that makes a lot of sense. And I also say, and if I don't have something that can help you, maybe I need to rethink the what I'm asking. Maybe this isn't such a great recommendation after all, if it's good for a few but bad for so many, or just I really have to think about that systemically, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly helps with the empathy piece. And like we were talking about earlier, we don't want to ignore if you're meeting with a client that has a very clear problem at hand that they've either told you or is very public, then it'd be kind of weird for you not to address it, right? So I think it helps with that empathy piece. The next couple of questions are, what is the best way to reach them? And, this means a lot of different things in terms of having an understanding of how they prefer to receive information. And sometimes you can get this from having a past relationship with them, or knowing a colleague who's worked with them in the past, or maybe talking to that gatekeeper to kind of learn a little bit more about them. But I had clients in the past who were very data heavy. And then I had some clients in the past who, if we did, a mock-up of their campaign, they were just very visually inspired, right? So having an understanding of how they prefer to receive the information. In this world, that also kind of means, do they prefer a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting? Asking the questions of, are we going to be meeting in a boardroom, or will I have access to a computer? Because you don't want to show up and think you're going to be doing this PowerPoint presentation and then find out that you're in a back room with no access, right? So really asking the right questions of how do they, how is the best way to reach them, but also what are you going to have access to in general, so that you can plan accordingly. And then the last two questions is, what do you want them to do? And considering how they might resist, so that you can play a little bit of devil's advocate. And where they might give you pushback, you can either confront that in your conversations, or just be prepared for a Q&A to be able to handle that.
Love it.